Paris, the summer of 1572. The magnificent city of the Valois dynasty was filled with a festive atmosphere. The marriage between Princess Marguerite de Valois and Henry of Navarre had just taken place, an event expected to bridge the deep divide between the Catholic and Huguenot, Protestant, communities, which had been bloodied by prolonged religious civil wars. The people hoped that peace was finally within reach. But just a few days after the wedding, Paris fell into a nightmare. On the night of August 24th, 1572, church bells suddenly rang out in the darkness. They were not bells calling to mass, but the signal for a massacre to begin. Squads of soldiers and fanatical mobs flooded the streets. They hunted through every house, every alley, dragging out Protestants and killing them without hesitation. Screams tore through the night, the stench of blood mingling with the smoke of gunpowder. What was once a bustling city was transformed into hell. Thousands of Huguenots were murdered in just a few days, their bodies piled high on the banks of the Seine River. This event went down in history as the Saint Bartholomew's Day Massacre. It was a night of terror that not only changed the fate of France, but also haunted Europe for centuries. What caused a marriage intended for peace to become a signal for bloodshed? And why did Paris fall into an inescapable spiral of hatred? The 16th century was a period when France was deeply divided by religious wars. After the doctrines of the Reformation spread across Europe, hundreds of thousands of French people who followed Protestantism, often called Huguenots, became objects of hatred for conservative Catholics. The conflict between the two sides was not only a matter of faith, but also political and social in nature. The Catholic faction held the throne and traditional power. The Huguenot faction, though a minority, included many wealthy nobles, merchants, and intellectuals. These two opposing power blocs created an irreconcilable conflict, leading to a series of French wars of religion, 1562 to 1598. During that period, blood was shed everywhere, from large-scale battles to street clashes. The French court at this time was greatly influenced by Catherine de Medici, the mother of King Charles IX. She tried to maintain a fragile balance between the two factions, but every political decision was like walking a tightrope. Many times she had to shift alliances to keep the throne for her son. The peak of hope for reconciliation came when Catherine arranged the marriage between Princess Marguerite de Valois, the king's sister, and Henry of Navarre, a Huguenot leader. The wedding was held in Paris, attracting a large number of guests from both sides. This event was seen as a turning point for peace. Two communities, once blood-soaked, were now connected by a royal marriage. However, beneath the veneer of lavish banquets, tensions were still simmering. The extremist Catholic nobility, especially the Guise family, never accepted the existence of the Huguenots. To them, reconciliation was merely a trap to eliminate their enemies completely. In the days following the wedding, a conspiracy began to brew, and with just a small spark, the entire city of Paris would be plunged into a sea of blood. After the royal wedding, the last days of August 1572 seemed to be filled with festivities. Thousands of Huguenot nobles and followers flocked to Paris from all over. But right in the heart of the capital, an event ignited the flames of hatred. The assassination attempt on Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, the respected leader of the Huguenot faction. On August 22nd, Coligny was severely wounded in a shooting on a Paris street. The Guise family, a radical Catholic power, was believed to be behind it. Coligny was lucky to survive, but the incident enraged the Huguenots, who gathered at the palace demanding justice. King Charles IX was flustered, and Queen Mother Catherine de Medici feared this outrage would turn into a civil war in the middle of Paris. In secret meetings at night, Catherine and the Guise faction convinced the king that only by eliminating the Huguenot leaders could the throne be protected. Charles IX hesitated at first, but under pressure from his mother and courtiers, he uttered a cold sentence: "Kill them all, so that no one is left to take revenge." At dawn on August 24th, the bell of the Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois church rang out. It was the signal for the massacre to begin. First, soldiers stormed Coligny's residence, He was dragged from his bed and stabbed multiple times before his body was thrown into the street. Coligny's death was the spark that set Paris ablaze. Troops and mobs of fanatical Catholics poured into the streets. Armed with swords, axes, and clubs, they carried out a manhunt on an unprecedented scale. The Huguenot nobles, who had been guests at the wedding, were now prey. Many were dragged into the streets and hacked to death right at the doors of their inns. Blood stained the cobblestones and bodies piled up on the banks of the Seine. The riot quickly turned into an uncontrollable killing spree. Not only nobles, but thousands of Huguenot commoners also became victims. Families were dragged from their homes. Women and children did not escape the blade. The entire city seemed to be consumed by madness. Witnesses recounted that many houses were looted. Windows were spattered with blood, and the Seine River ran red with corpses. The tragedy did not stop in Paris. The news spread like wildfire, and in the following weeks, similar massacres broke out in Orléans, Lyon, Bordeaux, Rouen, and Toulouse. It is estimated that between 10,000 and 30,000 Protestants were killed throughout France. The Bloody Night in Paris exposed a stark truth. The so-called reconciliation was just a cover for a systematic purge. The wedding toast quickly turned into cries of despair. A notable figure who survived the storm of blood was Henry of Navarre, the Huguenot groom. To escape the sword, he was forced to convert to Catholicism right in the palace, under direct pressure from the king and Catherine. But in his heart, Henry never forgot this humiliation, and many years later, he became King Henry IV of France, the man who issued the Edict of Nantes, 1598, to grant religious freedom to the Huguenots, ending the fratricidal wars. The Saint Bartholomew's Day massacre has entered Europe's collective memory as a symbol of extreme cruelty. It was not just a bloody event, but also clear proof that when religious hatred is exploited by politics, the consequences will exceed all imagination. The Saint Bartholomew's Day massacre was not just a storm of blood in one night, but a deep wound that scarred France and all of Europe for centuries. First, regarding internal politics, the Valois court thought that by eliminating the Huguenot leadership, they had cut off a threat to the throne. But in reality, that action only deepened the divide. The religious wars erupted again more fiercely, with a level of brutality far exceeding what came before. Trust in the monarchy was shaken to its core. The king, once seen as the protective father of all people, had now become an accomplice in the massacre of his own subjects. Socially, this event sowed fear and mistrust among neighbors. In many cities where Catholics and Protestants had lived side by side, trading together and attending each other's weddings, after that night, they looked at each other with suspicion. Neighborly bonds were replaced by memories of bloodshed. Children who witnessed their parents being murdered grew up with hatred, continuing to feed the endless cycle of violence. On the European stage, the massacre caused a major shock. Protestant courts like England, the Netherlands, and the German states reacted with outrage. Queen Elizabeth I of England, who had hoped for an alliance with France through the royal marriage, now felt utterly betrayed. In contrast, many hardline Catholic leaders in Italy and Spain saw it as a victory for the faith. Pope Gregory XIII even held a Thanksgiving service in Rome. This contrast in perspective further divided Europe. Among contemporary intellectuals, the massacre sparked many debates. Some saw it as proof of the danger when politics and religion are tightly intertwined. The writer Michel de Montaigne recorded in his essays that humans, when swept up in blind faith, can turn into savage beasts. Meanwhile, many Protestant historians regarded it as a crime against humanity, condemned as a permanent stain on French history. But what is noteworthy is that, from the darkness, some new ideas began to sprout. This event helped promote the movement for religious tolerance in the 17th century, paving the way for later important texts on freedom of belief. In other words, St. Bartholomew's was both a tragedy and a lesson. It showed how cruel people can be when hatred is exploited, but it also opened a new awareness of the need for peace and tolerance. More than 4 centuries have passed, but the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre remains a chilling reminder of the destructive power of fanaticism and hatred. What happened in Paris in 1572 was not just an event in French history, but also a mirror for humanity. When politics exploits religion, the result is often blood and tears. Today, the world still witnesses many conflicts based on belief, ethnicity, or ideology. From the Middle East to Africa, massacres still occur with a familiar script. Calls for unity turn into gunshots, and festivals turn into hell. This makes one realize that the lesson from Paris in 1572 is not outdated. But in that painful memory, we also find a ray of hope. Centuries later, France has walked the path of tolerance, and modern law affirms freedom of belief as an inalienable right. What was once paid for with the blood of tens of thousands of people has now become the foundation of civilized society. And that is also why when we look back at the past, we see not only darkness, but also a message. Peace never comes naturally. It must be preserved through understanding and tolerance. So, what do you think? If people today forget these lessons, will history repeat itself? Thank you for watching. Don't forget to leave a comment, like, and subscribe to explore more historical mysteries with us.